to the ones who care. Keep safe.
A sign. Booking.com. The family must depart.
Space to go for, indeed.
Find exactly what you're booking for. Booking.com, booking.com.
Yeah.
You cannot be in your engagement of your sympathetic nervous system or this flight, fight, or fear response. It will have a negative impact.
People are like, oh, I've been manifesting forever and visualizing forever, but I haven't gotten the thing. I'm like, what have you done to get the thing?
I get asked often, what do you work on with a lot of these athletes? And although we work on a variety of different things, one of them is visualization, because it's really an accepted practice in sports that you visualize things. You know how many week-long vacations I've taken in my lifetime? Less than I can count on both hands. Maybe less than I can count on one hand. I don't take weekends. We do it. My business is easy. But some people are humble enough to say, yeah, I can do this. But this one, let's just be honest. I didn't work for this. This is a gift from God. This is a gift from me. I like it when you put that it's so practical and you feel in the book. And by the way, this book is so thick with so many different things in it. We can do a 4-hour podcast and you can still go get the book. The few things that we'll be able to cover on today's show don't do the book justice. But I learned a lot. I actually wrote down the process that Ruth took you through for my own benefit. And so would you mind at least kind of going over some of that process for everybody? Because candidly, for me, I sat in this room yesterday and I wrote out that process for myself to use to calm myself down even at this age. So would you share some of that, please?
Are you talking about taming the heart or opening the heart and taming the mind and relaxing the body?
Yes, so particularly relaxing the body part of it.
Yeah, well, people who grow up in these challenging environments, again, it's like you're a goldfish in a fishbowl, but the water's dirty. And if that's all you've lived in, you have no idea that the way you're feeling or acting or how you're responding to the world actually is not beneficial for you. And like so many veterans who've been in the war zone, they not only have trauma from being in the war zone, but they have post-traumatic stress disorder. And so one of the things you ultimately have to do is you have to emotionally regulate. And this is because in these types of situations, your sympathetic nervous system, your flight, fight, and freeze response is chronically activated. And you don't appreciate it that all of your muscles are tight, you're always looking around. So the first thing she taught me was a traditional mindfulness practice of relaxing the body. And literally, we went from the tip of the toes to the top of the head. Now, I have to tell you, the 12-year-old, I had no self-awareness, and I was doing this, I showed up, but I'm sitting there going, wow, what is really going on here? And frankly, I was going, this is sort of boring. But, but I did it. And what I found was that I did relax, and I was much more calm, and I wasn't like, constantly having my muscles tight. And then she taught me a technique I call taming the mind in that book, and this was the ability to focus, in this case, on a candle, but you can do it with a mantra, or you can do it with simply an object. But what it does is it helps you not respond to the endless negative chatter that goes on in your head. And it also, you learn that there is chatter, and this is what I was talking about earlier, which is this negative self-dialogue. And unlike traditional mindfulness as it's practiced today, what she did there was to give yourself positive affirmation, which changes that dialogue and decreases the sound of it. One of the ways mindfulness works is you don't respond to the negative events going on past your head. In this case, though, you respond to them by reversing the statements to one of positivity. And then once she did that, she taught me a technique of opening the heart. And what I mean by that is I didn't realize how much I was suffering. And oftentimes when people suffer, you have this negative dialogue going on, and you begin to believe it. And the body, or the mind, if you will, doesn't know the difference between truth or non-truth. And what I say, or what I mean by that is, if you sit there and say, it is not possible, I cannot, that in turn, it turns into truth. Because if you say it's not possible, then there's no way it's going to happen. But conversely, if you develop a mindset of infinite possibilities for yourself and understand that you are the determinant, because this negative dialogue is fundamentally as if you're laying down a brick each time and you're creating a prison for yourself, and as those walls get higher, it gets darker. And the thing, though, is that you have the key to let yourself out of the prison. And once you realize that, that changes everything. And very much related to this book we're talking about today, Mind Magic, it's understanding how powerful you really are. And so many people give their self-agency away by listening to other people. And as a species, we have what we call negativity bias. Our negative things have a tendency to stick to us. So once she allowed me to be, if you will, self-compassionate and accept myself with all of my imperfections and understanding that that was okay, it also made me realize that everyone is suffering and that I oftentimes, like so many of us, we make a projection of how we think people are responding to us, but oftentimes, and again it relates to this book, we don't appreciate that a lot of people's actions at an unconscious level relate to their background growing up, that they carry baggage with. And that baggage determines every interaction, determines oftentimes the job or profession they take, determines the relationships they have. And so once she made me recognize that others were suffering, it also gave me another gift, which was I used to have a lot of anger and hostility towards my parents, not because they didn't love me, but because they were not there for me. And once I recognized this, I understood that they did not have the tools to help themselves. So it made me be much more thoughtful and kind. And then what happened is I realized that once I, one, stopped beating myself up, and two, carrying this hostility or negativity about me, it changed how people interacted with me. And once that happens, I realized that actually, if you create that correct type of energy or what you're putting out there, actually people do want to help you. And at the end of the day, that changed everything. And ultimately, which is actually the basis of this book, is she taught me manifestation or visualization technique. And in the first book, I gave some fundamental principles, but I didn't go into all the detail. And I realized after a lot of emails and letters from people that that was a key thing that people wanted to understand, but they wanted to understand it not from, as you said, the woo-woo pseudoscience part of it. They wanted to understand the fundamental neuroscience of it and how you can manifest maximally, if you will, or have the greatest potential to manifest your goals, your dreams, or your intentions. But that has to do with actually not the woo-woo side or the law of attraction or thinking the universe is going to somehow intervene if you have the right mindset. It comes down to, one, claiming your self-agency or the power you have, but also doing fundamental practices that will actually increase the likelihood, because you have to have what we call these cognitive brain networks to function at their best, and there are certain ways to do that. But the most important part is you have to get out of the stress mode into the rest and digest mode, or the engagement of your parasympathetic nervous system.
One thing that Dr. Brody points out in the book that you should all know, that I love that he says early on in the book, is that the universe doesn't care one way or the other. You're already ready to manifest it. You're already doing this. Just typically you're manifesting a lot of the things you don't want, that you're worried about, that you're fearing, you're acting out of trauma already. You have some of these skill sets because these brain centers already exist for you. And some of you doing a little bit of digging, we'll talk about HRV a little bit later, but going from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic state has everything to do with your ability to manifest. Just from a science standpoint, for the people that want, like, the meat, in the book, you talk about the fact that manifesting primarily takes place in four large circuits in the brain. So I can go through them, but I for free. You go through them,
Sure.
we go back and forth. But this is just for all of you to know that this is neuroscience. This is not, you know, poo-poo stuff here. This is actually happening in different centers and circuits in your brain. And there's actually 4 of them that he puts to the book. I'll start the first one, the default mode network. Of course, I had no idea what the heck that was. But why don't you take us through what the other 3 are and explain that to us a little bit?
Sure, let me just make a comment. And obviously, this book says it's about neuroscience. I got a LinkedIn message from somebody said, you know, I bought this book and I really hated it because it went so much into the neuroscience. I'm like, going, that's not the name of the book.
Read the background of the guy who wrote it.
Yeah. But anyway,
So my game plan is to walk 30 minutes every morning, 30 minutes in the night, and on my way to the office, 20 to 30 minutes. So in total, we're going to have 90 minutes
understand how we got here today.
of walking per day.
Because we have to change our habits, our mindset, and our deep-seated beliefs.
Now that's how I'm planning to do it. And then also incorporate active rest days. So I usually rest 2 days in a week, and the other days I'm lifting weights. So those days I'm resting fully. I'm going to make sure that I walk
that is actually manifesting because you have these
still, and then the other days I walk 30 minutes and the other 30 minutes for weight training.
So
that's the next level we are on now.
There are these 4 areas of the brain, and to have them function at their best, you cannot be in your engagement of your sympathetic nervous system, which is flight, fight, or fear response. It will have a negative impact. Although it's not to say you may not be able to manifest, you may not be manifesting what you need to manifest. So you have to be engaged in the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest of the digest system, because your cognitive brain networks, of which the default mode network is on, function at their best in that state. So the default mode network is what happens or is activated when you daydream or you mind wander, but it's very self-referential. But it's also the place where you define who you are. And this is critical, to have this image that sort of sits in the background of what you want to be or how you want to be. And then the interesting thing is, the other network that's really critical here is what we call your salience network. So from your default mode network, you create a narrative that then activates the salience network. So salience is meaning something mouth-watering, or something, when you think about it, it activates things you want, right? And so there it results in the subconscious being activated related to what you want or your intention or what you're trying to manifest. And once you're able to stimulate that, and I use the example of a bloodhound, once you're able to give the bloodhound the scent, then this activates the attention network so that there's a laser-like focus of your attention on manifesting that, and then through the salience network, the bloodhound starts searching around for it. And the salience network, if you will, is on alert all the time during your waking state. And once you're able then to define that intention and activate your attention, then the situations that many of us call synchronicity or coincidence occur because when your executive control network, which is in your frontal areas and has access to memories, experiences, and in some ways like the CEO who determines how you respond to this unconscious or subconscious desire. And then it occurs. And let me give you a couple examples. I'm sure you've been at different parties or events where it's really noisy. Yet, if your name is said, you turn to it. Even though it's completely loud, nobody else heard it, you turn to it. Because that is a fundamental part of your identity. And so the same is true also as an example. I'll see a patient who may have some sort of a brain condition, let's say a meningioma. The person will sit there and they'll say, you know, I've never heard of that before. Wow, this must be really rare. But I'll see them 6 weeks later and go, it's the most amazing thing. I run into 6 people with the exact same condition, right? Because you have embedded that now, whether you want it to or not, into your subconscious. And this is the thing that can get embedded through fear, through wanting to do something positive for yourself. And I'll give you another example. There's a project that I've been working on for 7 months, and it's very esoteric. And I was at a coffee shop, and it was like completely noisy. You couldn't hear anything yet. But at the end of all of that, I heard 2 words that were critical to this project, which would not have ever been normally out there, or I wouldn't have responded to it. I went over, introduced myself. It turns out they're working on the exact same thing, and now we're working together on it. And this is the type of synchronicity or coincidences that repeatedly occur when you unleash your subconscious. Because what the subconscious wants, the conscious is ordered to have happen, if you will. So those are how those networks work. And if you
Question about the synchronicity, I'm just curious about this. Is it the fact that those things always existed around you, or potentially did, but you were oblivious to them because they weren't embedded? And that now that they're embedded, you're seeing, hearing, or feeling those things that were always potentially within your awareness, but you were unaware of them? Or is there some sort of pull power that's taking place that's creating these synchronicities?
I would say they're always there. We just never are attuned to them, right? And so, because you have to understand, our mind is always having to struggle to what we attend to, right? Our actual attention is quite limited. Although most people don't believe that. Even driving along, and I'm sure you've had the experience where you're driving along and you start thinking about something, and then you're like 10 miles down the road, and all of the stuff that was going on, you can't even remember, right? And so, and there's a classic experiment, which I think I mentioned in the book, called it's the grilling experiment or something like that. But you'll find it in the book. But it's amazing. It's these 2 teams are playing basketball. One is in a black uniform, the other's in a white uniform. And what the experimenter asks is either, tell me how many times the people in the black shoot a basket and get a point. Or the other is, how many pass the ball throughout the whole game. So it turns out in the middle of this video, there is an individual dressed in a gorilla suit who actually walks through the entire game through the group who shooting the basket. And over 50% of people do not even notice it. Can you imagine somebody in a gorilla suit right in front of you and you don't even see it?
How does one begin to embed the things they want to manifest in their life? Obviously, I was taken back in the book by how much it's state-oriented for you. In other words, the state that our bodies are in. I've always, in my own practice and coaching people, always just sort of went right to the technique of the visualization, never really caring for the state that one's in order to be open to creating these new neural pathways. Right? So, could you give us like a practice or a couple of the practices that somebody can begin to implement? I think right now this part that you may share, I think you can change a couple million lives right now with just a process-oriented structure for somebody to begin to embed the things that they want as opposed to the ones that they're operating out of trauma or fear.
So let me make a couple statements before we go there. One is, you have to understand, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, what are you already manifesting? 2 is to understand the difference between what you think you want and what you need. And I think actually, as you mentioned earlier, you can get things, but it's not always what's best for you. And the reason I bring this up is, in the Western narrative of success, which for many people equals happiness, the narrative is, to be happy, you have to have money, power, and position. Once you get those, therefore your life now is fantastic, you'll be happy, and you will get all the other stuff that will continue that happiness. Now the problem with that narrative is that what people don't appreciate is that oftentimes the things that people believe they want are based out of impoverishment spirit, or a belief that when others see them having accomplished this or that or things, that they will get external affirmation that will make them feel happy. And in fact, as a 12-year-old that went to this magic shop, she actually had me write down a list of things that I wanted. And of course, from my poverty background, and this was the baggage that I carried with me, it was I wanted to live in a mansion 40-some years ago, 50 years ago, it was I want to be a millionaire. That was a city millionaire, I guess. I wanted a Porsche. I wanted a Rolex watch. All these external validations of quote-unquote success. And I ended up getting every one of those things. You know, I became a doctor, and I became a doctor not that I didn't want to help people, but it was also, I am a doctor, I'm important people, look at me, right? And I had all of my friends telling me how great my life was. Yet, here I have a mansion overlooking the bay in Newport Beach in Southern Cal. I have a villa in Florence. I have a penthouse in San Francisco. I have a Porsche, a Ferrari, a Range Rover, a Mercedes, a BMW in my garage. I have Lady Starlets. I'm flying private jets. And I was never more miserable than I had ever been in my life. Yeah, I had manifested everything that I thought I wanted. And so the problem is people get focused on things that aren't going to help them because they think that these types of things are what are going to create a life of happiness, which is what everyone ultimately desires. And so you have to understand, though, that once you change your narrative, not because of what you think you want in that point, because it's not about you. And, you know, unfortunately, society has created this narrative that you should change what I want. I want to be famous. I mean, look at what we've done with our children. If you ask high school students, what is it you want to be? What are the four main things? And this encompasses over 75%. I want to be an influencer. I want to be a millionaire. I want to be a celebrity. I want to be a professional athlete. I mean,
Very different in the Western world compared to the answers you'll get from other countries. But there's a great study between the contrast of those two.
yeah, exactly, because it is a completely different narrative because we have a very aggressive structure that promotes that narrative of conspicuous consumption and how to just get these things when we have. So you have to change that because that activates the sense of I want, actually activates your sympathetic nervous system. And in some ways it limits you, it's not so you can't get what you want. But once you start changing your narrative to understand how we evolved as a species, which is to care, not only for our offspring, because they require it, but when you care for others outside of your small circle, that activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which does several things. One, it stimulates your reward center. Two, your physiology fundamentally works at its best, and in fact, your longevity is increased. But also, when you look through the world through that lens, you understand the superficiality of any of these other things, and you understand also that when you care for others, it has a very positive effect on you both mentally and physically. And as the Dalai Lama says, if you want to make others be happy, be compassionate. If you want to be happy, be compassionate. So, looking at that lens, and so now to more concretely answer your first question, what are the techniques? The techniques are fundamentally, how do I gain access to my brain to make it work for me and not get lost in things that I don't need or are not helpful for me? Now, one of the things we've been talking about attention a little bit is also understanding that how we walk in the world, how we analyze things, what we respond to has to do with input from our sensory organs, because that connects us to our external environment. So we receive about 10 million bits of information from our sensory organs every second. Yet, we on a conscious level only respond or have access to about 50 to 100 bits of information.
Too late to wash your hair? Try Got to Be dry shampoo. And enjoy your extra time. Got to be whoever you want to be.
So 99.99% actually are associated with maintaining homeostasis of our bodily function. But the reason I mentioned the small percentages, this is information we can control on a conscious level, and then we can actually embed it into our unconscious through a process which I call value tagging. And in some ways, this is our ability, if you will, to place our intention in the filing cabinet of our subconscious, which then gives the unconscious, that bloodhound I mentioned earlier, the ability to look at that file, smell it, get the scent, and start running around trying to help you manifest. The techniques to do that, though, to get access to your mind, is a training program which is very much like a meditation or mindfulness practice, because you have to be in the right mental state. You have to calm the mind. You have to relax the body. You have to look through the lens of compassion, if you will. Because that's when your body, and I say your body, I mean your mind and your body, are functioning at their best. When that process occurs, all these cognitive brain networks, which we talked about a little bit earlier, function at their best. I want people to realize that when we talk about manifesting, this process is not 100% guaranteed. It's not like, hey, let's put you doing now, you're going to get 100% I guarantee everything you want. What it does, though, is, one, it makes you understand what you've already been manifesting. Two, it gives you clarity of intention about what you should be manifesting. And this is through relaxing the body, taming the mind, focusing your attention, embedding that attention, and then that creates the greatest possibility for you to manifest your desires or create the life that you want. Now, I'm sure you've talked about eudaimonic versus hedonic happiness.
We have not. Please talk about it.
What the hell, Ed?
There's an IQ discrepancy. That's what you're doing, brother. Can't wait. Yeah, I know a lot about this because of your work and other work I've done. We've not talked about it on the show.
Oh, really? Well, so if we look at oftentimes this term happiness, there's what we call hedonic happiness, which is hedonism, if you will. And this very much relates to what I want. And in fact, unfortunately, there was a movement in our society that's now spent a few decades where there was this narrative that if you were in a race, any kid who in the race gets an award, right? And not recognizing, one, that creates a sense of entitlement, even though you didn't do any work to get there. And it negates the fact of life, which is there are winners and there are losers. You have to show up, you have to do work, Otherwise, you're not going to get what you want. And so this is a very important aspect. But when you focus on I want, the very nature of that I want has to result in stimulation of your sympathetic nervous system because it's out of fear. You have to have this to show others you're okay. You're chasing after external affirmation. Now, I've said this sometimes when people sit there and go, you mean it's wrong to have, have materialistic desires? And I say, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. And I'll explain that in a sec. The other side of this is what we call eudaimonic happiness. This has to do with service and meaning. Okay? And if you compare the two, one gives you happiness which is transitory and shallow. The other, and this is when you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest mode, results in purpose and meaning because you're being of service to others. And that's when all your brain networks function at their best, thereby giving you the greatest possibility of manifesting your intention. But getting back to having things, my statement is not to sit there and say, one, it's horrible to have things. I will assure you, I live in a nice house, I drive a Porsche, I have a Mercedes. There's nothing wrong with that. The difference is where it is wrong is if you look at that, that is your identity, and if you lose it, you have all this fear and anxiety and insecurity. Versus how I look at it, I am very appreciative, have immense gratitude, thoroughly enjoy it, but if it's gone tomorrow, it has zero impact on who I am, who I see
So
myself
just did 30 minutes walking on my walking pad, aka treadmill. Like I was saying earlier, the plan is to do 30, meaning walk 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes within the afternoon, 30 minutes in the evening, every single day, minimum. And then the other days I'm doing strength training. So this was my first time using this. This is from the iHoverboard.
I want to make $10 million
yeah.
let's just say. That's one of the things I want to manifest. But
I'm going to keep you guys updated in terms of my progress through live workouts as well as my stats and everything. Currently I'm 81.5 kg and the goal is to get down to 75 first and then to 70 and then we'll see how it goes. So diet is really important. It's not just working out, it's a symbiotic process. So, thank you guys. Hope you guys work out, do something good for yourselves this morning. See you guys. Bye.
The actual manifestation. Does the intention attached to it have some